All right.
Hello, church. We are here once again with our Essentials video series. This is episode 2, and I have some special guests that are going to impart some really neat stuff to you. John and Duygu are here, the Mintons, and you guys can say hi if you like.
Hi, hello.
Hi, church.
We miss you guys.
Definitely, we miss y'all.
So, yeah, we do miss you. We're hoping that these some of these new ideas we're implementing are going to help us to miss each other less and encourage each other. So we're going to jump right into it because we're trying to keep these videos short and sweet. We want to talk tonight about the topic is what can we learn from both non-first world culture and from church history, and we're going to bring some scripture into this about with the current crisis and functioning as a church. So I picked these guys because they have become dearer and dearer friends over the last few years, and I've spent many hours talking particularly with John, and I think that you guys have a lot to say. So let's start with Duygu. You grew up in Turkey.
Yes.
And you understand, and John told me something, and I want you to talk, but I was hoping you'd tell us a little bit about the prom thing, because you very much understand how we are not owed the things that we here in America think that we are owed, and you grew up in a very different culture. So people are going crazy right now because they can't, have quick internet or whatever. There may not be milk in the store. For most of the world, that is a normal thing. Tell us just how does this hit you? I think you have a really good perspective to share with us.
Well, until somebody brought it to my attention about the prom thing, all the seniors in high school won't be able to graduate or have the graduation ceremony that they were looking forward to. I had never thought about that part of the situation, and it kind of hit me. I was like, exactly, and I felt sorry for them, and because it's an opportunity lost, and God knows when they can have their time. But then thinking of from my perspective, I come from Turkey. Proms, yes, we have them, but it never was something we looked forward to, or graduation or ceremonies like this. It's more like academic centered. You do your schoolwork only, extracurricular activities is really extra. And I didn't have too many. I didn't participate in too many. My thing was school and home. So it wasn't a big deal for me not to go. Like if somebody said, if you didn't go, it wasn't like the end of the world to me.
Right.
So I guess your perspective is important, like where you come from and how you perceive these things. But I definitely understand the people, who have a high regard, appreciation and understanding of these celebrations. And I just am sorry that those things are not happening right now. Like everything else, came to a halt at this time. So it kind of adds more to, I think, people's stress level if you have a high school senior, in your home.
Right.
You don't, but if you have, it is one more thing.
Did you ever have a yearbook in Turkey?
Yes, we did have a yearbook. We
did
did
you?
have it. Yes, we did have, but they were never like huge part of our graduations. That was something like, okay, you do it, type of thing. So I am hoping that people can tackle with this and see that they will be appreciated by their families still. And I am sure and I am hoping a time will come when they will be celebrated even more because of this missed opportunity. So people shouldn't be too desperate, because of this, because there is other, maybe more pressing issues. I'm not saying one problem is bigger or more important than another.
Right.
It depends on what you deal with really in your home.
Right.
Then that's your problem.
Right.
You make for your kids.
Exactly. If you're not dealing with something, you can, appreciate that or understand it too much. But asking God is a great way of handling things, because God tells us to be waiting in silence in times of really anything, in times of crisis,
right,
especially. And I think it's a key thing, it's going to bring a lot of fruits. So I can tell that to people.
Awesome. John, tell me a little more about, you had some thoughts on that topic as well, or when we talked earlier.
About on the third, I guess out of the first world.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, prioritize. I actually talked to my principal on via meeting, and some schools, I think, when they get the all clear for parents that may be out there, because I'm in the teaching, I'm a teacher and I'm in the system, and they're saying that they're going to try to hold a prom at their own high schools, not like at the Ramadas and stuff like that.
Right.
But they're going to try to give kids as much as they can. So that's kind of good news on the front end. I got that from a good source. But as in for, you know, us here in America versus the other, you know, second and third worlds, as we call them, you know, there is a lot, you know, I know, like I said, I can't judge the hearts of too many folks about what they're going through with their kids and stuff like that. But we do take a lot of things that are much like less what the third world would take as important. We take, like, for instance, like my wife was saying, she was like, over there, basketball, baseball. So I'm a baseball coach, so Auburn cancels. Our season's been canceled. So we're not having, nobody's going to finish out with tournaments, nothing like that. So everybody was like all upset and all that. But over there, it's like all extracurricular.
Right.
There's nothing integrated with the school system, nothing like that. And I talked to several people from Europe and places like that. They're like, yeah, that was one thing that surprised us, is so people put a lot of emphasis on this stuff. Even parents kind of build their children up for this, because it's kind of, here in America, it's a rite of passage.
Right.
You know, I was telling you, I was like, that stuff didn't matter to me. I was kind of one of the weird ones. You know, I didn't get my picture in the yearbook. I didn't go get the glamour shots of me and the pretty sparkly hair and the cowboy hat that was purple. You know, I didn't do that. I didn't get in the yearbook. I was one of the guys who was voted like.
Maybe because you were weird.
I was weird. And the thing is I was one that was voting most likely to be the next Ruby Ridge. Those who know their history know that one.
What about the unweird ones? What is their fault, though?
What is their fault? They don't have no fault.
Yeah.
I was just crazy, but I wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's sort of like, it's just one. But you know, the thing is with they have a lot of different priorities. There's mainly academic. We have a lot of priority towards like social gatherings, social stance,
right.
popularity. You know, also like just social butterfly. You know, I don't want to say. I mean, I don't want people to get kind of. Oh, he's thinking everybody's like a social butterfly. No, I'm not. I'm just saying that, you know, some people are more social, and we have a lot of, you know, I guess I'm trying to think of the words to say it. A little more emphasis on, you know, kind of the outward rather than, you know, the academic.
Inward.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
you know, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, the language that I would use, just because we've talked about this a good bit before this discussion, is wants versus needs. And so when, you know, when wants are taken away, or what we consider wants versus, you know, are they really wants or are they needs, and vice versa. And so it's sort of like when things that we thought were needs are taken away, but those weren't really needs. They weren't food and clothing and shelter and companionship. You know, a prom, as nice as that would be, if the world's falling apart, it drops very low in the level of priorities.
Well, Jeff, you know, the thing is, real quick before we maybe move on, one of my students told me they spent $1,200 on a tuxedo. $1,200 on a tuxedo.
And this is an impoverished school.
And this is supposedly where we have majority of our students are in the poverty.
Right.
And also, I talked to some of my, you know, my girls, my female students, and they're saying, because there are a lot of them in cosmetology, and they're like, they make a lot of money. Some of these girls do on the side because they know how to do all the different hairdos and stuff. And so they're out that money. And plus, they were going to spend like $500 on a hairdo, and plus like another $1,000 on a dress.
Right.
So it's like their night to shine. So, and the parents, you know, even though we talk about wants and needs, I understand that parents have like a heartache right now.
Absolutely.
And I wish God, and I pray God assuages that, you know, and like, and let them understand, the children, that, you know, later on, I didn't know it back then. And the thing is, you'll have much better memories in the future. God has a lot more in store for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm the one that always comes across as a machine here. But I guess I have to, it's, you know, in the big picture. And I think you guys understand this very well. I think a reason a lot of the shock in people are unwilling to you know, shelter and hunker down is we're just not used to living without our ice cream, and or our proverbial ice cream. And so I think, you know, for the church, you know, as we translate this conversation to our faith, it's like, you know, like I said Sunday, if you can't have a steak, but you can have a peanut butter and jelly, and those are pretty darn good. You know, so we've got to be able to live on the minimum and be thankful for it, rather than decrying the fact that we don't get our prom, that we don't get our service, that we don't get, you know, whatever it might be. And people that are from a situation that's more, I don't know, second world, third world, or just simplistic, and they're not used to those things, we don't expect those things. And so there's a shift, I think, in our thinking that, you know, if we're to carry on and endure in this, there has to be a shift in our thinking. And, you know, I think there's a lot of wisdom in looking at other cultures and history. And, you know, you see that, you know, I remember hearing a sermon from an Indian pastor named Zach Poonen, and he said they were showing videos of poverty in America, and the, you know, people were driving these old beat up cars around, and the Indian kids were watching these videos, and they said, but they have cars, you know. And so it's just a complete different idea of, like, to them, our poverty was wealth, and they're living in shacks made of, you know, 4 rotting boards in a slum somewhere. So, you know, to have a car for them, and to live in low rent housing was a palace. So it's all about perspective, I think, is kind of what we're.
It is.
It really is.
Yeah, it is, definitely.
Tell us church history, John. You know, you and I have talked a lot. I want you to speak to Martin Luther's letter, because there was a plague during the time that the Reformation was founded. But you know, there's just been dozens and dozens of calamities that have fallen upon the world in the last several millennia. If we were to zoom out and sort of maybe look at this in light of some of that, what could we learn before we hit the fire alarm, you know, and say it's DEFCON 5, to go back to an 80s analogy?
Good. That's a good question. And one thing I like to tell folks here in the church is, you know, you turn the media off, or at least turn it down, because the thing is, they're very sensationalized. Like I don't know how many times I was on different 24/7 cable news, and they're saying unprecedented was like the word of the day.
Right.
Don't be fooled by that. And I'm going to read you Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes, by the way, this topic has just opened up. Ecclesiastes is like one of the greatest books in the Bible, in my opinion. I just love it. I can read it over and over and over again and get more stuff out of it. And starting in Ecclesiastes 1, chapter 1, 9 through 11, it says, that which has been is what will be, and that which is done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. And by the way, this is written in ancient times. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. It's basically Ecclesiastes and the Lord saying, you guys have a short-term memory. That's why we need history. That's why there's chronicles in the Bible, the boring chronicles, apparently, you know, and you know, like who begat who. Well, guys, there's a reason for that, is so we don't forget where we've come from and where we're going. And the thing is if you go back all the way into recorded history, there's been plagues. I mean, if you want to look at the Bible and the 10 plagues of Egypt, you can go all the way up to what I call the Antonin plague. That was during the time of Marcus Aurelius. That's where Christians shined brighter than the sun. And one reason why Christianity spread like wildfire during this time period is because it was Christians, not pagan other religions. They were running from this stuff. It was like the bubonic plague. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know how it was contracted, but it was the bubonic plague ravaged Europe and Asia for almost darn near 1800 years. Okay, in different sets points in time. It's also known as the Justinian plague, the Cistercian plague. We're going all the way to 1665 in London, which is very well documented, where it influences Isaac Newton and some other people. But to say the Antonin plague with Christianity is that the Antonin plague had the Christians come out, go into homes fearlessly against the plague because of their beliefs in the afterlife, knowing that paradise comes if I die. They went into these homes where other people were scared to death and were feeding them, not necessarily like bandaging them or just getting involved just to get involved. They're actually helping the elderly, the widows, their neighbors, because nobody else would. The government wouldn't do anything. Basically, it was calamity. And Rome almost fell apart, but it was for Christianity that saved it together. And after that, Rome almost started its path towards becoming Christian Rome about maybe 100 years later. Under because 100 years later, the Edict of Milan was passed. That's where Constantine became, where all religion was accepted, no matter what, even Christianity.
But should we say now that the plague won't affect the Christians and we should go and...
Well, it also shows Christians, we all have a role, whether that role is going to be helping, and that's where it gets to Martin Luther. Martin Luther had, once again, this was happening in Wittenberg, the same plague that attacked Istanbul, that killed which was been Constantinople under Justinian's time, killed about 500 to 1.5 million people. And it was the same one. It had and you know what they all practiced, guys? Social distancing and quarantine.
That's right.
And they didn't go to church. They kept them out.
And he wrote a letter that I think you said you put on Facebook, an 8-page document that is very similar to what's being distributed now by our government in terms of just be careful, be smart.
And it was Martin Luther to another pastor, because a pastor was asking him, Johann Hess was his name, saying, what do we do? Do we flee from this? What is our role as Christians in this? And Martin Luther outlines biblically by showing verses after verse, backing up what he is saying in this letter to another pastor. Mm-hmm. He said, as pastors like you, Jeff, you would be like what would be considered, God put you on the front line. You're a leader because you're a shepherd. He's like, because guys, you're going to remember Martin Luther's daughter died from this same plague that why he was writing this pastor, because he wouldn't leave the city. He says, my place is here. I got to go help and minister. He also said government officials, but emphasis on Christian government officials. Mm-hmm. If you're a Christian man and you're an official, or you're a doctor, or in your role, God is putting you here for a reason. Mm. So do not fully have faith and do your work. But he's like, those who have the weaker faith, maybe not have been in there as long into the faith, or that really don't have any kind of business other than just them being in the city, it is not a sin to flee. Go to the country, go somewhere else. And he's also mentioned in the same letter that if you have the plague, or think you had the plague, or been around the plague, and get in groups of people, and somebody catches it and dies, he's like almost equates these people with the sin of murder. He says, you have to watch your neighbor. You have to, and he's like, and don't shy away from medicine and doing what is right, what the government tells you. Mm-hmm. Do it for your own good and safety. That's common sense.
Right.
But he says there are people there that are like the leaders that need to be on the front line. If you're not, it's not a sin for you to flee or to take a step back.
Right. Mm-hmm. And talk to me about, just as we kind of wrap up, the Isaac Newton, who was a man that loved the Lord and did some amazing scientific discoveries for us. And I didn't realize this till you told me, but it was during the plague, and because he was in a sense in self-quarantine, that he had the whole Apple experience and the discovered or invented or outlined the theory of gravity, or the laws of gravity, I guess is what we would call them now.
Right, the gravitational constant and most of his basic tenets of calculus, and also his basic laws of motion, all kind of like came from his personal experimentation at being quarantined at his country home.
I didn't know.
Wow.
Yeah, he was actually a real big Christian. He was a very heavy Christian. A lot of people don't know. A lot of these enlightened thinkers that you don't hear about it in mainstream media or in science. They don't tell you that Rene Descartes had a God moment towards the end of his life. That Blaise Pascal wrote Pensis, basically an apology for Christianity. Who he was under gas law. That's why we have Pascal's. Right. That's the same guy. Isaac Newton, he was a very devout Christian and believed in, he's like, I'm studying Latin, Hebrew, and Greek so he can talk to God. So he wanted to understand it, and he believed mathematics was the language of God. That's why we have Principia Mathematica, which talks about calculus, is because he believed that that's how God talked to us as another way. It's how he worked. That's how he was an architect, is mathematics. But yeah, he was in quarantine. Cambridge shut down, which is the university, King's College, Oxford. They all got sent home.
When was this?
1665. And the thing is, actually, the plague started doing an outbreak in London in 1664, but it was about 2 years. And what it really ended the plague, unfortunately, was the Great London Fire of 1666. And Samuel Pepys writes about that very much. Right. And he also talks about how, hoarding food, guys that had this, think people getting frustrated with people at the lines in Walmart, doing all this kind of stuff, guys. Samuel Pepys had a big wheel of Parmesan cheese that he talks about in his diary that he buried in his yard with like several bottles of wine, hiding it. So and when he left to his country estate, saying, I hope when I get back to London, if I ever do, that that I can always go dig up my wheel of cheese and my wine that I left there. Hopefully it's still there.
So let me sum up what I hear coming through. I mean, with Isaac Newton, the lesson is there's a lot that can be accomplished, and God wants to move in us in this time.
Yes.
And then the other part, there's just a humility that happens to me when I read history, when I read the Old Testament, church history, American world history. When you realize that, like, I love what you said, the word unprecedented is probably the wrong word. We don't want to minimize the pain and the suffering that's happening, but at the same time, we there's something about us being able to keep our composure and realize that we are very small, in the scope of human history, and this is something that has happened over and over, and the church will get through this, and the faithful will get through this, and the Christians will courageously walk through this. And it's not the end. It could be part of the end of the world. We've been living in that for 2,000 years, but it's not a reason. It's like in Thessalonians. I was thinking of Thessalonians 1. He talks all about the end of the world, and then in Thessalonians 2, he's telling them, guys, you got to go work. And the whole reason for that was the Thessalonian church took that message hardcore all the way, and they just quit doing everything and looking in the clouds waiting for Jesus to come back. So he wrote the second letter, and he said, you still have to love your neighbor. You still have to pay your bills. If a man doesn't work, he won't eat. So there's a sense of us like trying to just continue in the normal main and plain things of our faith while this is happening and not going crazy.
Exactly. Well, you gotta always look for the silver. I don't want to say silver lining, because I think there's like a lot of platinum and gold in this. In every one of these horrific, horrendous plagues, everything, everybody's life's upended. But you understand, Europe was a dark ages for a certain time period, for a certain reason. Do you know what got us out of the dark ages? What? The plague. It killed off a quarter of the population. The nobles had no more serfs to push around. They had to go dig their own gardens. It caused a certain individualism that came out of that. The Renaissance happened. The Enlightenment happened because of the Black Death. And it caused people to start thinking again about science, doing things on their own with limited numbers of people. So every time something like this happens, there is a change. Now, whether good or bad, as Christians, we have to always remain positive, hopeful, patient, and humble, no matter what happens. We got to be that like in that, we have a picture in our house with a lighthouse shining a bright beam over a thunderstorm with a big lightning bolt coming down. We have to be that lighthouse to people. And then you look in Matthew, as we kind of conclude in chapter 6, verse 24 or 25 through 34, it talks about when Jesus is talking about don't worry. Don't worry. Does the sparrow of the field need food? Does the lilies in the field need their water? He's like, I got all that stuff. And, and he talks about don't worry about today, because tomorrow's just another day. It has its own troubles. So while I encourage people, and my wife does too, after we've been like butting our heads, thinking like, oh my gosh, it makes you stir crazy. But the thing is, now's a good time to get into this book.
Amen.
Time now. Get into it.
Yeah. Amen.
Put your life around it.
Because we have a tendency right now, the world is calling us to be part of the world. Be worried, listen to the news 24/7.
Yeah.
Go to people in social media and like be more discouraged, see more. I'm not saying do not be misinformed, but at the same time, the world cannot give us what God can give.
Another interesting perspective, like she's saying, I came from the most unusual source. It was a professional. Remember, everybody knows Hulkamania, Hulkster, right? Hulk Hogan. Okay, brother. He laid some pretty good truths out today. In a tweet, he says, you know what all this plague has done is the Lord basically taking our gods from us. We can't go to them, or if your God was the actors in Hollywood, he took your movies from you. If he takes a lot of stuff like your cars and driving around, he's taking that from. He's wanting you to get closer to
Right.
I can't really. I'm paraphrasing what Hulk said, but it was really good, and I was just like, wow, that came from the Hulkster.
The Hulkster.
You know,
Excellent.
From the NWO, the Wolf Pack. You know,
That is awesome.
He knows what I'm talking about. But but no, I mean, seriously, this is a great time. We're trying to structure ourselves around the Bible and being more biblical, trying our best, you know, and it's hard for us, you know, like we look at Mike and Megan and their structure. We're totally not that.
Yes.
I am not a structure guy.
And that's okay.
I was amazed by them.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a great example and encouragement.
They are so awesome like that. And Duygu's like, oh, can you believe this stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just like, I don't know how they do it, but I don't think I could do it. I mean, it's hard.
You get up whenever, go to bed whenever.
Yeah.
That's not good, guys.
Don't do that. Yeah, don't stay up past
Well,
midnight.
each person figures out what works for them. I think that's.
You know what happens to things when you can feed them after midnight? When they get fat and they turn into a gremlin.
Whatever we do, though, I am figuring it. You know,
yeah.
God needs to be in the center of it.
Amen.
Because He always finds a way out.
Yeah. Excellent.
And He just gives you this excellent peace that the world cannot give you.
Yes.
That's a great place to end the gospel. I just was praying that and texting that to somebody earlier today. He gives peace the world can't give, and He gives joy that the world can't take away. That's what the Gospel of John says. Well, John's going to leave some resources on his Facebook page, and we could talk. This is how John and I always do. We talk usually for like an hour and a half, and then one of us has to go to the bathroom or something, so we quit. So, but we're going to leave it at that. We hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and reach out to John and Duygu if you have any more questions about this. Guys, thank you so much.
We love you guys, and miss you so much.
Yeah. Pray this goes over well and God's plans accomplished.
Definitely. Better days are coming for us believers, you know, and we are very hopeful and cheerful.
Amen. All right. Well, we'll see you guys at the next video. God bless you. Peace and joy.
Thank you.